Hi, I'm Bray. Sorry about all the wind noise, but that's because I'm out here in the real world rather than a studio. I was actually this close to being an electrical engineer, but happily, by the time I got my degree, I was already way too busy having fun up in the Arctic, hauling ridiculous carts across huge islands and sailing inappropriately small wooden boats through dangerous icy passages, all of which led to me becoming an award-winning photographer for Australian Geographic instead. For over a decade now, I've been running small group photo tours to all of the best wildlife destinations around the world, including Africa, Antarctica, Alaska, the Andes, the Amazon, and that's just the places that start with A. I also teach photography, and my free online photography course has had over 8 million views. And I'm also a LUMIX Global Ambassador. So I do get asked a lot of questions. So for what it's worth, here are 6 things I love about my LUMIX GH6.
Number 1, it's micro four thirds.
Which not only makes it and the lenses much smaller, lighter, cheaper and more portable, but also has the effect of doubling the effective focal length of the lens. So this 1 to 400mm lens, which is my normal wildlife lens, actually becomes a 200 to a whopping 800mm lens, which is just amazing to be able to zoom in that far. And it's so light that you can just handhold it forever.
Number 2, it's mirrorless.
Well, of course it is. LUMIX invented mirrorless, and I still love being able to see exactly what I'm going to get through the viewfinder, you know, with a live real-time histogram to get the exposure just perfect before I take the photo. These days, that old DSLR technique of taking the picture and then check to see if I've blown out the highlights seems about as dumb as having to take your roll of film down to the chemist and get it developed. And there's all the other features that mirrorless make possible as well, like eye and face and animal recognition for focus tracking, focus peaking, and so on.
Number 3, it's got 25 megapixels.
Which is plenty for almost everything that I do. And if I did need more, the GH6 now has this amazing new 100 megapixel high resolution mode, which you can even do handheld, where basically the camera takes 8 photos really quickly, moving the sensor a tiny bit each time, and then using a bit of magic, basically comes up with a full-on 100 megapixel photo, revealing even more detail, even in RAW mode. It's incredible.
Number 4, it's got insane video and slow motion.
The video capabilities of the GH6 are out of this world and well beyond anything I could ever need. It can film 5.7K at 60 frames a second. It can even film 4K in slow motion at 120 frames a second. And at the still perfectly usable 1080 high definition, it can film at a blistering 300 frames per second. That's 12 times slow-mo, which just looks unbelievably cool.
Number 5, it's got epic stabilizing.
It's actually a little bit ridiculous. It's got 7.5 stops of stabilizing just in the sensor, which basically means you can handhold a photo that's almost 200 times slower than if you didn't have stabilizing. So using that old rule of thumb, that you shouldn't shoot any slower than the inverse of the focal length of the lens, using this fancy little 9mm lens, that means I should be able to get a handheld shot for as long as 10 seconds. And while I've got this lens on, I've got to say it's a pretty amazing little lens. Its effective focal length is 18mm, so perfect for landscapes and general scenes. It can focus as close as 9.5 centimeters, so it's perfect for close-ups. And the aperture opens up to f1.7, which makes it awesome for low light, stars, or creating beautifully soft blurry backgrounds. And it's just so tiny.
And number 6, it's just better.
It really is. Not only does the GH6 have a much faster processor inside, giving faster everything, faster frames per second, faster photos. You can actually take 75 photos a second in continuous burst mode, faster autofocus and so on. But the sensor is actually pretty groundbreaking too. Not only does it manage to pack in more megapixels than any other micro four thirds camera around, but it somehow managed to overcome that trade-off between more megapixels but worse ISO and worse dynamic range. Using some clever dual gain circuitry, the GH6 somehow actually produces higher dynamic range and better ISO performance than its 20 megapixel predecessor, the GH5, which is what I've been using for the last 4 years. So I guess I'm going to have to go back out there and take all of my best wildlife photos again. Luckily I'm heading to Alaska in a couple of weeks and Antarctica at the end of the year.
There's actually still 2 spots left on that trip if you want to grab your LUMIX and fly with me down to Antarctica over Christmas.